Hi everyone, welcome back. APIs are under constant threat from hackers. Let's see how AWS WAF protects them before traffic even reaches your backend. In this demo, I'll show how AWS WAF protects an API gateway endpoint using three rules: cross-site scripting protection, SQL injection detection, and a rate-based limit. We'll use a mock backend to focus on security. Now let's look into the diagram. Here we see we have a client, we have API gateway where we are using mock integration where we will be returning a mock response of message hello from API gateway WAF demo. On the top we can see we have AWS WAF where we will be creating a web ACL which will contain security rules and it helps in traffic filtering. Now let's move to the flow. Here, suppose a client sends an API request to the WAF. Suppose the request passes our security rule. So in that case, we see this green arrow which says request allowed by WAF. So the request can now be handled by API gateway. So it will invoke mock integration and gets back a simulated backend response. Now the user will get simulated response back. Suppose in scenario 2, again a client sends a request to WAF. Suppose the request violates our security rule. In that case, we will send a blocked response directly to the client with a code of 403 forbidden by default. Here you can see that we didn't hit our API gateway in case our request violates our security rules. Now that we have seen how WAF filters requests, let's test it in real time and see which requests get allowed and which get blocked. Now that we are in the AWS console, let's open API Gateway. Let's click Create an API. Scroll down and let's click Build under REST API. Let's give this API name. Let's click Create API. Now click Create Resource. Let's give this resource a name. Let's click Create Resource. Now for the recently created resource called Test, let's click Create Method. Here let's select method type as Get. For integration type, let's select Mock. Scroll down and click Create Method. Now let's open the Integration Response tab and click Edit. Here we can see we are sending a method status code of 200. Let's click this Mapping Templates. Here we are setting our content type to application/JSON. So let's create a template body for our response. Now let's click Save. Now under Integration Response, we see we are sending a method status code of 200 with this message template. Now let's click Deploy API. In Stage drop-down, let's select New Stage. Let's call this stage name Prod and click Deploy. We see a successful message saying that this deployment is active for prod. So let's expand this stages and let's click /test and click method type get. Now we see we get back invoke URL. So let's copy this URL. Now let's move to the terminal and see if our newly created API gateway returns back our mock response. Indeed, we see we get back status code of 200 with the message hello from API Gateway WAF demo. So it shows that our API gateway is working correctly. Now let's move back to our AWS console. Now let's open WAF. In this WAF console, click Create Protection Pack Web ACL. For this app category, we will be selecting API and Integration Services. Under Select Resources to Protect, let's click this Add Resources and click Add Regional Resources and select this WAF Demo API prod, which is our API gateway that we created recently. So let's click Add. So let's scroll down. We see there are multiple options, but for our demo, we will select this third one, build your own pack from all of the protections AWS WAF offers. So on the right hand side, we can see we got this console where we will be selecting AWS Managed Rule Group and click Next. Let's see what's under Core Rule Set. Let's click it. Here we can see there are many rules that comes with this. For this demo, I will be using cross-site scripting attack. So let's add this rule by clicking Add Rule. Let's click Add Rule again. Select AWS Managed Rule Group, click Next. Let's click SQL Database. Here you can see it protects us against SQL attack. So let's click Add Rule. Now let's click Add Rule again. In the custom rule, let's click Next and we will select rate based rule and click Next. For rate limit, we will set it to minimum of 10 and for evaluation window, we will be setting it to 1. Let's give this rule a name. So what this rule does is if a single IP sends more than 10 requests in 1 minute, WAF blocks it. We are using a low threshold of 10 requests per minute just for demonstration purposes. This makes it easy to generate multiple requests and so WAF blocking excessive traffic. In a real API, you would adjust this number according to your application's normal request volume. Now let's click Add Rule. You can see we now have 3 rules added to our WAF. You might be wondering what this WCU refer to. So AWS WAF uses something called Web ACL Capacity Unit WCU to measure how much each rule does. Managed rules like XSS or SQL injections are complex, so they use hundreds of WCU. Our simple rate limit rule is lightweight, so it uses only 2 WCU. WCU helps AWS calculate performance and cost for your Web ACL. Now let's give this WAF a name. Let's click Create Protection Pack. Now you can see we have successfully created a Web ACL called API WAF Demo and associated it with our API gateway called WAF Demo API. Now on the right hand side we can see we have managed rules, so let's click manage rules. Here we see our rules that are associated with our Web ACL. So now let's check if our rule called rate limit IP is working. Let's move to the terminal. Let me copy paste a command. This is a bash for loop that repeatedly executes the same curl request a fixed number of times, in our case for 20 times. So let's run this command. You see we got back status code of 200 with a message, hello from API Gateway WAF Demo. So let's run this command multiple times to see if it actually limits our request to the API Gateway. Now you see for all the subsequent requests, we get status code of 403 forbidden with a message called forbidden, which shows that we have successfully tested and implemented rate-based limit to our API gateway using WAF. Now let's move back to the console and now let's test a rule to see if our request containing SQL attack gets blocked. Now let's move back to our terminal and simulate SQL injection attack. In this curl command, you can see this part. So this is a URL encoded payload simulating a SQL injection attack. So let's run this curl command. You see we got back HTTP status code of 403 with message forbidden. So it shows that our WAF is successfully blocking a request that has a SQL injection attack. Now let's paste the curl command that simulate cross-site scripting attack. Again, this part of our curl command is a URL encoded payload simulating an cross-site scripting attack. So let's run this command. You see we again got back 403 with message of forbidden. Now let's move back to the AWS console. Let's click this AWS WAF demo and go to view dashboard logs and sample requests. Let's explore this dashboard. We can see we have total of 42 requests, out of which 20 of them are blocked by a rule called rate limit IP. Looking into this AWS managed rules SQLi rule set, we see we have one request being blocked, and for AWS managed rule set common rule set we have again a blocked of 1. Let's move back to our command prompt and let's call this URL with XSS attack multiple times and see if the number changes here. Currently we have only one request that is being blocked by this common rule set, which includes XSS attack. So let's refresh this page and see if the number of blocked request count gets increased. Let's refresh this. Now indeed we can see that the block request count has been increased to 6 requests. Scrolling down here, let's look at the attack types. We can see under volumetric we have 20, under XSS we have 6, and under SQL attack we have a count of 1. So today we saw how AWS WAF protects an API gateway endpoint using XSS, SQL injection, and rate-based rules. To avoid unnecessary cost, let's delete this WAF. Let's go to this API WAF demo. Under Protection Pack Web ACL, let's select our recently created Web ACL called API WAF demo. But before deleting this, we need to disassociate our API gateway. So click Manage Resources from the right hand side. Select this Web Demo API and click Disassociate. Let's confirm this. Let's click Disassociate. Now that the Web ACL has been disassociated, now let's go to the action and click Delete Protection Pack. Again, confirm and click Delete. Now you can see we have the message where we see API WAF demo was successfully deleted. If you liked this demo, don't forget to like, share and subscribe for more hands-on tutorials. Thanks for watching.